Can you imagine a world without music? I can't. This is Robert Manni, host of Guys Guys TV, and this week my special guest is music insider and journalist Ray Chelstowski. We're going to discuss everything from vinyl to streaming and everything else, and it all starts right here, right now on Guys Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys Guys TV, Guys Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Guys Radio, it is the interview portion of our show, and I'm delighted to welcome an old-time colleague of mine, Ray Chelstowski, contributing editor at Goldmine, writing vinyl finds, feature stories, and reviews. He's the former publisher of Rolling Stone magazine, as well as Entertainment Weekly, and he writes his own music blog called Disciplines of Sound. He's a media professional. He's led a broad range of brands in news, entertainment, B2B, special interests, nonprofits like Rolling Stone, Newsweek, Daily Beast, Entertainment Weekly, Girl Scouts. Ray is a renaissance man in the media and music business, market-facing leader. He has C-suite relationships at dozens of the world's biggest and most prestigious consumer brands, and he speaks regularly on panels at industry events and regularly participates in media and marketing and loyalty entertainment webinar. He's a published author on industry topics, and he's interviewed so many great people. Last one, big name I remember was Robbie Robertson, I believe, but he's just done such a wonderful job. And he also points out a lot of great music that's coming out, and he has an affection, I believe, for singer-songwriters. And I'm delighted to have him on Guys Guys Radio. And he also gave me a wonderful review on my novel, A Guy's Guide to Love, because he read the book and he really enjoyed it. And he could see the parallels of my story with what was going on in the industry at that time. So it's my honor, and I'm delighted to welcome Ray Chelstowski to Guys Guys Radio. Welcome, Ray.
Great to see you again. It's been a while.
It has been, and I'm so glad that you're still at it and you're doing the music business and you're doing such a great job. So let's start a little bit with your background. You worked in the media sales space, which is a tough space and it's changed dramatically over the years. When you were there, it was a lot of it, and I worked on print brands that are now been broadcast and now the internet, etc. But tell us a little bit about how you kind of made your way up to become the publisher of Rolling Stone magazine as well as Entertainment Weekly. And what was that experience like? And what did it really teach you about what's going on in the media business as well as the music business?
Well, I often laugh about the fact that, being the publisher of Rolling Stone, based upon my avocation and the things that I love in pop culture, particularly rock and roll, it was a dream job. But I got to the role at that very moment when print media was at a very, very difficult point in time where brands really needed to reimagine who they were. And in a lot of ways, I think that it was very advantageous for me to get to these brands in leadership roles at the time that I did. Because while I'll tell people that I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm very entrepreneurial. And I like building things, I like fixing things. And I like the fact that at that moment in time, there was a lot more flexibility in terms of what we could do with brands and how we could extend where you'd find them and how the people could discover content. People were much more open to ideas than they probably would have been when you and I first met when I was working at Vanity Fair. Mm-hmm. And so, at Rolling Stone, we were able to take a look at this and be able to talk to the owner about the idea that the print edition can't be the centerpiece of the brand forever. Right? It will change. The brand will be the content. Whatever way you want to consume that content will be really your relationship with that brand. And we can do a lot of things to help people get involved with it. And one of the programs I was just recently talking to someone about was we built an apparel line with Macy's that used pieces of cover images on trucker hats, on hoodies, on T-shirts, etc. And for us, it was a way to attract a younger audience, right? It was in a young male's department of the store, but every one of these items came with a subscription, a trial subscription. So it was a device to, one, drive new revenue and leverage the power of the brand, but it was also a way for us to engage people and have them start to sample the content, understand who the writers were, what the voice of the magazine and the brand was about, and really start, cultivating a readership that could live beyond boomers and Gen Xers. And so it was a lot of fun to be part of that and be part of something that could take brands that you grew up with and you loved and you admired and really extend their lifespan. And I think that today the brands that were able to start to do those kind of things 10 years ago are the ones that are really continuing to be relevant. We found that in some cases with some titles in the media business, like when you put the word week into it, we get news every second in every conceivable way. And that not only seems antiquated, it just seems out of line with the way that we all engage with news and content. So from my perspective, what's been really fun is to have migrated from the business side, right? And so I started off in ad sales, and then you start, as you move through the ranks of publishing, you start taking on other things like circulation, and you start taking on production, et cetera, marketing, right? Everything other than content creation. And you start to really understand the way the business operates. And I think that because of that, when I migrated to the place where I am today, where my relationship really with media is on the content creation side, it gives me a different kind of perspective to say, how will people react to content? What are the things that we need to do in terms of what the headline is, what they call the deck, which is the teaser content? How do we create things that are search engine friendly, that the words will pop when you go, I'm going to do a search on Robbie Robertson. How does the way that I construct that and position and market it, put it in a position in a search for you to find it more easily and start to understand who I am and what my voice is? And so I think that they've both worked hand in hand in a really interesting way and have taken me forward. But I'd be lying if I told you, Bob, that I'm still not asked by a lot of the people I write for advice on business issues and how they think they might be able to fine tune their operations. And because I write for a lot of brands that I love, Goldmine is a magazine that this year turned 50, which is terrific and has some of the biggest bylines in the business. A lot of people that we all knew and grew up with in writing, they started off at Goldmine. Also write for Stereophile, which is another property that's near and dear to my heart and just has a readership that's so enthusiastic, so engaged, so responsive, and so knowledgeable that when they actually give you feedback, whether it's good or it's bad, it's really informed from a different point of view. So a lot of what I've been able to do is be able to take advantage of that, but also use the experience that I've had in media to help these brands in ways, hopefully, that it, gives them a leg up and an ability to continue to do what they do with the authority, that authoritative voice that they've always had. So I love it. It's a funny thing. I was asked the other day whether or not I thought magazines would make a comeback, right? Like books made a comeback. You may remember that when the e-readers started coming out, people are like, no one's going to do this anymore. No one's going to take 5 books on a plane when they're going on a trip. They'll take 5 books on an e-reader. But the resurgence, particularly of teenagers in terms of actually reading physical products and engaging with it, just like vinyl, there seems to be that the physicality of things has been really interesting. So I'm hopeful that as magazines maybe take an eye and look at what's happening in Asia, where instead of sacrificing the actual physical product and the quality of it, the paperweight, the glossiness, the finish, the art direction, et cetera, that complements all the written words and actually puts the money into it, I think we might be able to see where people actually invest in it again. And I'm really hopeful that you see that happen and that the brands can continue to be alive in that format, because I think that they can do things there very hard to do elsewhere.
How do you write for Disciplines of Sound, which is your blog, Goldmine, Stereophile, Studio, and others? How do you determine what you're going to write about for each of these venues?
So for Goldmine, I started writing for them. I'm looking over here. My first cover story was with Joe Walsh, the Eagles guitarist, probably about 10 years ago. And I started writing focused on guitar players, right? It was guitar players that were more also writers, right? They were guitar virtuosos. So Joe is a great example of that guy who's recognized by people like Pete Townsend as the best ever, right? But also recognized as a great songwriter. And then I started picking up some assignments where I was getting into the real avant-garde on the guitar space. So I was interviewing people like Mike Stern and Eric Johnson and others. And it kind of led me into a place where I guess I'd always been really attracted to jam bands, the Grateful Dead, the Allman Brothers, and you can argue that in a lot of ways the band was one of them. And I started getting into that space and doing a lot more work with those organizations and became kind of known in that world. And so it kind of expanded to where then I developed a weekly column with a real focus on jam bands and the anchors of that being the Grateful Dead, the Allman Brothers, and the band, but then going into all the other bands that are emerging who have carried that tradition on. So bands like String Cheese Incident and Drive-By Truckers, et cetera, where we started talking about what's happening there. And the interesting thing about the genre, whether you like it or you don't like it, is the fact that the Grateful Dead created a business model that they probably had no idea was going to be the future of music, forget rock and roll. This idea of merchandising and marketing and creating communities, right? Fan bases that are more communities, where we're taking people who are fans and turning them into advocates. And you see that ability to do that probably in its greatest manifestation with Taylor Swift, right? Where she's just got an operation that's able to do that almost with a flywheel effect in a whole number of ways to engage people all the time and create, whether she's on tour or not, a 365-degree tour. And so the jam band scene has really emerged as sort of a beacon of that because it happens on a much more grassroots basis, but it attracts a real younger audience and an audience that operates in a way that I think gives us a lot of hope. So I focus on that predominantly for Goldmine now is my core responsibility. I operate in that lane, and most recently, my last piece was an obituary on Phil Lesh, the bass player from the Dead, who died last week, and the importance and the impact that he had. For Stereophile, I write rock album reviews, and what I'll do is I'll identify records that I think that audience would want to explore. And so it could be in the case of a reissue that's been remastered, like I just did for Stereophile, this remarkable box set of demos on vinyl, 5 vinyl records of Jimi Hendrix from Electric Ladyland. It was literally recorded a month before he passed away. It's an extraordinary piece of material. But then I'll look at bands that are new that a lot of these folks may never have heard of, but through a high-end audio system, the material that they create is something that actually is amplified in a way that an audiophile would appreciate. And so I'll submit what I recommend to the editor, and we'll talk about it, and we'll figure out which ones we agree are probably the best to do. And I'll do anywhere from 2 to 4 reviews a month for them. And the big difference with Stereophile is that it's required that the review be done against physical product. So it's not streaming. It can't be a digital file. It's got to be either vinyl, a CD, and again, I think that adds a different kind of dimension because when I write about it, I'm also going to be talking about the sonics and the mix and the mastering, et cetera. Another magazine, Copper. It's a digital-only magazine that I write for out of Boulder. It's got 140,000 again self-described audiophiles who subscribe to it. There, I tend to do Q&As with established artists, and that's where I'll interview people like Ann Wilson from Heart. This week, literally yesterday, interviewed Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth. So established artists who are continuing to make music, continuing to tour. I find that they have a lot of stories that people haven't heard. They probably haven't been necessarily in the spotlight, but they have something new. And I think the big point of difference that I bring and a lot of people talk about is I do my homework in seeing what people have asked them and what they haven't asked them. And I try to find things that they haven't spoken about that. You know, I'm not here I'm not playing gotcha media here. I really want to talk about some really fun stories that people who either know the artist hadn't heard, people haven't discovered this person, makes them want to dig in more. And I often hear from people that I interview that, wow, you ask a lot of really great questions. I'm not just getting the same old, same old. So those are those kind of things. And then my blog really started out as, you know, it started out as my introduction in how to do this whole thing, right? It was I had an assistant at Entertainment Weekly who had suggested we would talk every morning about music, and she's like, "Yeah, you got to write a blog." And I'm like, "What do I know about writing a blog?" And when I left Newsweek, I decided to do that, and I created this blog that was named after Steve Van Zandt's band, Disciples of Sound. I called it Disciples of Soul. I called it Disciples of Sound, and it really helped me get my footing and understand what would work and what wouldn't. And I had the thing that really took off for me, Bob, was I had this one moment, and it's where I realized, well, I could actually probably do this. It was a Saturday morning, and I'd gotten a email from a woman who was a publicist for Robert Cray, the blues guitarist. And she'd always hook me up whenever he was in market, and we'd go see, my wife and I'd go see him, and we'd go backstage afterwards, drink wine, talk, what have you. And she said, look, I was wondering if you could do me a favor. I know you've started this blog. Could you cover this music festival? It's a jam band festival in the Ozarks. I need some help getting some lift on this. And I said, sure. And it was a Saturday morning. I wrote the blog at 7 in the morning. It was the shortest entry that I'd written to that point in time. And I had some sports event, I think it was basketball, with my daughter to go do. We leave, we come back at 10, it's got 50,000 hits. We come back after lunch, it's got 500,000 hits. Right. And when you start reading the comments, what was really actually kind of funny was that there was many comments of people saying, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. As there were that people were, that did, but it demonstrated that we're in a new era and that you can find a way to connect with people. And when you start looking at the analytics and you say, wow, I'm doing really well in this particular country, and they seem to have found me, and they're starting now to pitch me on covering bands from these markets. It's a really fun thing. So I don't think that I could stretch myself any thinner on or any further on this, and still deliver the kind of work that these guys expect from me. But I think it's an interesting blend, and I cover a lot of different bases. And there are times where I can go to them and go, I know this is a little bit outside my lane, but would you guys be open to the editors? Would you be open to me doing something? Because I feel pretty strongly about it.
Okay, a lot of ground to cover. Ray Chilstowski, the rock writer extraordinaire and media expert. We're talking about the music business today. So let's talk about some of the changes that have gone on recently. And like in our lifetime, we started out with 45s and then vinyl and then cassettes and then CDs and then back to vinyl. And now, of course, streaming has taken over. What do you see in terms of what's next? What the impact of streaming going forward and what's next? I know obviously vinyl's had a revitalization.
Sure. It's it's not good for the artist. I mean, that's the thing that there's a couple concerns for me about streaming. I mean, there's certainly from a user standpoint, there's great utility, and the role that AI is going to continue to play when algorithms can take a look at how you consume music and start introducing you to music. When it becomes more sophisticated, I think that users are going to love that, right? And that's already happening. I don't think that the algorithms are particularly strong at the moment, but they're moving very quickly to where all of a sudden you're going to start discovering stuff that you wouldn't have thought possible, and that's good for music in general. But you know, Peter Frampton told me that his song "Baby I Love Your Way" is every year, like clockwork, one of the top streamed songs globally. Okay, for that he makes $15,000 a year. In the mid 90s, 10 years, maybe 12 years after the album by the Police, Synchronicity, had been released, and radio was already on a bit of a decline, Sting was making $5,000 a day on royalties for every breath you take. So when you think about the disparity of the ability to actually make a living, and everyone's not going to make $5,000, but you're seeing a lot of artists right now in their late 30s and early 40s rethinking their career path, deciding really, can I make a living on doing this? Is this trajectory viable? And my concern even more about that is what we retreat to then is where AI and automation starts becoming such a big part of music creation that that idea of artistry where people actually have an idea and actually build it out, right, from just a thought in a guitar or a piano and start building out a song, that starts happening in a way that it loses some of its soul. So I think that there's a challenge. One of the reasons why vinyl has made a comeback is that a lot of the labels don't want to deal with it. So they cede the rights to vinyl to the bands themselves. And so bands, if they can actually find a manufacturing facility to actually press these, right, and they can actually distribute them through their own stores, sell them while they're on tour, et cetera. If they're selling the record for $30, they can potentially make $20, right? So for them, as much as there's a curiosity, a fascination that you're seeing with young consumers with the physical product, it's also being matched by a supply that's driven by the need for artists to be able to make a living. And this is one of the ways they can do that. And so I think that something is going to have to be determined because if someone at the top of the food chain can only make that much money through streaming with a song that's, a top 20 globally streamed song, it's impossible then for anyone to look at streaming. And what I do think is happening as well, Bob, is that people are starting to they're moving away from the album format. So they're doing literally EPs. I'm going to do 4 songs here. And so instead of doing one full album in the year, the first third of the year, here's 4 songs. Then I'll do another 4 songs. Then I'll do another 4 songs. Because then you'll actually stream the 4 songs. I put an album out, you might listen to 2, and I'm not monetizing the balance of the record. So there's a lot of things happening at the moment to try to find ways to operate within the system. But the system doesn't really allow for artists to look at that as a way to operate. And so you're going to see much more happening with live events. And one of the things that's taking hold right now as well is live streaming. So if you can't make it to the show or they're not hitting your market, but you want to see your favorite band, you can pay to watch them play. And the production quality is pretty high. So it's forcing the business to evolve, but it oftentimes feels like it's at gunpoint.
Let me ask you about and again, something from our past. Classic rock seems to be very, very resilient. I've got a couple of my own theories that you can correct me on. One is that it's very expensive to break new bands. Number 2, it's always easier to get consumers to buy more of what they're already buying than the cost of acquisition of new consumers. And it seems like there's a hand-me-down basis for a lot of classic rock where you can always hear it, and then your sons and daughters listen to it, and then their kids are listening to it, and and the music was really good. And I want you to talk about the whole phenomenon with classic rock, why it's so special, why it keeps going, and with 3 other points to that, if I may. One is the artists selling their catalogs from classic rock. Number 2, I'm going to take 2 artists. I want to get your take on what's happening with Springsteen now, because I know he just sold his catalog. And then the Stones, who were, not doing much for 18 years except for touring now and then, and yet they hit the home run with in my opinion, and most critics said Hackney Diamonds is like the best thing they've done in like 30 years. Talk to us about all of those things.
Okay, I'm going to try to remember each one of them. Let's start off with classic rock. And classic rock, I talk about this often with artists because I believe you grew up in the New York area, right?
Yes, Jersey.
So we grew up with maybe the best rock station in the world, WNEW, right? And we had DJs on this station who were as big as the stars that they broadcast. You got guys like Scott Muni, who knew the Beatles, the Professor, he knew everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And so for us, rock radio was different because radio was on everywhere you went, right? You're washing your car, you got the radio on. You're throwing a ball around, the radio's on. You're on the beach, the radio's on. You're at the beach, someone else's radio's on, right? Right. And so it really created a sense of community because we all could say, I remember hearing that for the first time. It was
Mhm.
playing, and this is what I was doing. And the consumption of music has really changed from being something that we enjoy as a crowd to something we listen to one on one. Our experience is really singular in that way. So um, a lot of what I think people have seen represented from the way we grew up with rock through movies is it is romanticized, and there was a world around it, right? There was an understanding of they went into a studio and they went on the road and these things happened, and there was a romance to that I think is really appealing. But I think in some ways the the uh, the the popularity today of classic rock radio among young people is the result of a couple things. And I went to a college graduation party back in June, and I looked over at one of my wife's cousins, and we were just like, "Can you believe this? We're listening to all music from the 70s and 80s. These kids are like, 22 years old." There's a bifurcation that's happened in popular music, and the problem for the opportunity it created for classic rock is you see kids either gravitate towards rap and hip hop, or they gravitate towards arena country, and in the middle there's a void, and that void is where people are going and looking at this music and going, the music speaks to me still because it speaks to a certain point in your life. The music's got attitude without being misogynistic, without being like it's got character, it's got a voice. And I regularly hear people say, "You guys were so lucky to grow up with this." My kids, they're like, "You grew up with the best music. This is unbelievable. We don't hear anything like
Mhm.
this." And when you listen to rock radio now, rock radio doesn't allow for us to play the new Stones record, really, right? You're going
Right.
to hear all
No.
the other stuff. So the actual channels to which you're actually turning for classic rock, they're giving you Immigrant Song again and again. And these kids are hearing, it's almost like the repetition to it is something that's saying, it's making them understand how powerful it is. Um, I There was an article, and I talk about this one a lot, Bob, and it's sort of like the $64,000 question. Um, 2 years ago, there was an article in the Washington Post about something called like the death of the electric guitar, and they referenced the fact that they looked at like all top 20 songs of the year that year, right? Weren't rock and roll, okay, but not one of them included a guitar. Not one included a guitar.
Wow.
And then you looked at Guitar Center stores are going under, Sam Ash is going under, Fender and
Mhm.
Gibson were struggling financially. And there weren't people who were saying, I want to be Jimmy Page, I want to be Eddie Van Halen, I want to be Eric Clapton, right? Because there wasn't that instrument wasn't playing a role in the music. That's changing because of the phenomenon that you're talking about. All right, so Springsteen and the Stones.
Yep.
Springsteen selling his catalog is I think striking while the iron is hot. I think that there's he had been very adverse to any commercialization of his music over the
Right.
years. You may remember the movie Mask with
Mhm.
Eric Stoltz, that it was
Yep.
about a particular kid with a physical affliction. The kid loved Springsteen, and Springsteen didn't want to commercialize his music, so they ended up using Bob Seger's music there. So we've gone a complete 180 from where he had been back in
Right.
the 80s to where he is today. And he's, you know, all this some of the stuff in terms of the cost of tickets at his shows, et cetera. It starts to look a little suspect. But you have to ask yourself a question. If you look at the concerts and the people at his shows, there's some young people in there, but the majority of the people The last time I saw him was the River Anniversary Tour, and there were guys with sweaters over their shoulders. He might have been singing about the working men, but a lot of those people were middle-aged guys. And so the marketability of these songs, you know, they may have a shelf life, and he may be taking a look at that and saying, you know what, right now is the moment to capture that. I think a lot of people are wondering how long that can be the case. But time will tell. In terms of the Stones, when they came out with Tattoo You, it was one of like the most important records that they had made. It probably the last important record they'd made until this current one. And everything was like, this is the best record since Tattoo You.
Mm-hmm.
Tattoo You was in '81. And at that point, Mick Jagger was in his late 30s, and they were already like chiding him about like, well, you had said you were not going to be rocking when you're 35, and here you are 37. Now he's in his 80s out there. And the thing about it, it's remarkable, is he's got great energy and great enthusiasm. And I think that what is interesting about he and Keith is that they've always been tied to their roots. And they had a couple moments, and particularly Mick, where he kind of migrated into more pop-driven music. But I think what this does is it connects back to where it all began, and there's an authenticity to it. And their age doesn't impede their ability to deliver it in a really Rolling Stone-esque way. And I think that that's really great. And I think that they have found a way to continue to be relevant where a lot of bands, have given up. Like, Billy Joel had said for a long time, he just came out with that one single this year, which was tremendous. But he was like, I got nothing else to say.
Mm-hmm.
It'll come out. And the fact that they have things still to say is great.
It's interesting. I was listening when Hackney Diamonds came out. I was in the car with my wife, and she said, this is a band. This sounds like a band, and it's so refreshing compared to all the other, mostly auto-tune stuff and the commercialized, heavily produced stuff. This sounds like an actual band, like it almost sounds like they're playing live. And I think that's part of the appeal. Also, I think with the Stones in the merchandising, they've done an incredible commercial job with that, like it or not. It's everywhere. And then with the reissues, the Dead have so many of their live shows. The Stones have gone back with a lot of their classic albums and reissued. A lot of other bands are doing that. And now I notice as soon as Springsteen, and we touched on this before we got on the air, as soon as Springsteen's deal was set, boom, there's two kind of documentaries about him, and then an album drops, a live album out of that. So I assume they're just going to start, for the classic rock bands, they're just milking the cow now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I also think that there's a sense that he has, even though he seems to be in remarkably good shape, that that I've got just so much more, so much time ahead of me, and how am I going to use it, and how am I going to put stuff out there? Um, Recently saying I'm going to go until I can't do it anymore.
He said that, yeah. I was wondering about that, like, because I thought, as you had kind of alluded to, like maybe this last tour was his last big tour, and that was it. Because I know he's had some health challenges, and his wife has had some health challenges now. And like, is he going to keep doing this? Because he really, he puts in a long show, and he puts it all out there, and his voice is really taxed at the end of that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that he's done that's wise is that it's kind of like, if you take a look at the if you take a look at the performances that Elvis did in the late '70s, he didn't have a band behind him; he had an orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what Bruce has now too. So there are people that fill in the gaps
Yeah,
that he doesn't have to
great point.
carry the weight all of them all by himself. And I think he's able to do that without someone going like, wait a minute, where's Bruce?
Mm-hmm.
Which is it's a real gift. It's a real art. Um, it's also, it's really an interesting moment because there's been a long standing question about, oh, what happens when you take a look at Polestar data on concert tours? Who's going to fill these arenas? Like when these guys stop touring, when the Who doesn't tour, when Springsteen doesn't go, how are they going to sell these shows out? And the reality is that there's a whole world music scene, particularly from Latin America, that a lot of people, if you're not into that music, you wouldn't know it. But like, there's a band from the Bronx, Aventura, that is they play this form of Dominican Republic music. It's called Bricata. They've sold out the Garden like 4 nights in a row, right? So there are people who are stepping forward, and what I think is going to be interesting is when those rooms become more open to other acts because the Who isn't touring, because Springsteen isn't. This whole thing that's happening in music right now already with genre fusion, where the different forms of music are mixing to create a new form, and largely with world sounds, is going to be kind of interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Running out of time, but I only got a couple of questions. Country seems to be has filled a big gap. First, you had the old school country, Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings and those guys, the Highwaymen, and now then it got very commercial and to the point where this doesn't sound like country music. And now it seems like there's a lot of really good singer songwriters who are really raw in the country space. And now you've got a lot of urban bands. You've got Beyonce doing a country album. You've got what's the guy, Nas or whatever, who won the Grammy a couple of years ago. He does country, and everybody seems to be doing country now. What is the appeal? The dollar, or what? What is it, Ray?
Well, the funny thing is that Chris Stapleton, who kind of is one of the people, he and another guy, Sturgill Simpson,
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of driving the country scene to this more Merle Haggard-esque
Mm-hmm.
moment, right? Where it was in sound a little bit more like that, in theme a little bit more like it. The thing that's interesting about Chris Stapleton that a lot of people don't know is a lot of that arena rock country that were big hits. He was a big writer of those songs.
Really?
Like he would play with his wife separately in Nashville and do the kind of stuff we're hearing now. But he was really gifted at being able to write hits for people like Faith Hill and others to sing. I think that I think some of it goes hand in hand with the thing that we talked about with rock and roll. Like there was a fascination that the Rolling Stones had, certainly around Exile on Main Street, with country music, and you can hear it on songs like Sweet Virginia, right? That
Mm-hmm.
they brought a lot of that kind of those kind of elements to their music and themes to their music. And I think that that's sort of an offshoot of it too, because when I take a look at the people who really like that sound that's emerging. They also like rock and roll, and I can even see it in my own son, who's a big Tedeschi Trucks fan, which has real Allman Brothers obviously roots to it. When you start looking at people like Sturgill and others, you're saying it's got that kind of Americana feel. And the question that I know a lot of people have is that there was a sound in the 90s that was starting to develop in Americana that kind of went away. And I think that this is sort of a hybrid of a lot of different things, and goes to what I was saying before. I think you're going to see a lot of new sounds emerge, and that's a good thing.
Last question for you. Three bands that people should be aware of. Doesn't matter what genre that are going to break big and they have great music that people need to check out.
Okay. So I thought you might ask me that. So the first one is this band called Wildorado, and they're from Oklahoma.
Mhm.
They're a Tulsa band. This is their new album called Talker. I think from my perspective, it's going to be my album of the year. They are, yeah, I want to say they're sort of like Ryan Adams meets U2.
Okay.
Um, it's a
Nice.
just a
Mhm.
fantastic sound. This is a band from Los Angeles called Wand. It's their new record
Okay.
called Vertigo. Again, this is a group that has a real atmospheric sound to them. I think it's really, really terrific. And I, um, I really would encourage people to tune in and pay to learn more about an artist from Queens named Jesse Malin. Jesse
Mhm.
Malin's been
Sure.
around for a while, but he suffered an aneurysm in his leg, and it sidetracked him. He has a new song out called Argentina. If you don't know anything about him, it's about his journey of recovery. And there's a big benefit concert happening this month with people like Springsteen and others playing with him. yeah, I'd check him out and any of his albums, including his first solo album, The Fine Art of Self-Destruction.
Where can people find out more about you? Forgive me, I should have asked you that
Sure.
earlier.
So my jam band column is called Natural Funk Project, and that's at Goldmine Magazine. It's called goldminemag.com. Okay, you can find it there. And then go to stereophile.com to look up my reviews. If you go to album reviews on the nav bar, you'll find it under rock and roll, and I encourage you to take a look at it. And I encourage you to tell us whether you like it or you think maybe we got a couple things wrong.
Fantastic. Ray Chelstowski, amazing breadth of work, amazing success, amazing insights into the music business, and you're an amazing guy, and you play a good round of golf too. So thank you so much for being on Guys Radio. I hope we can do it again. I learned a lot today, and you really know your stuff, so thank you.
Thanks, Bob. It's always great talking to you.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by subscribing to our channels and platforms. Thank you.